what's going on around in pretty much every country around the world, in which almost every country, almost every government you want to take a look at, spit at, mention, is cracking down on what they deem fake news. Russia, if I'm not mistaken, just passed a law to criminalize, again, don't quote me verbatim on this, but to criminalize what they might deem fake news or criticism of the government. So all of this stirring up, trying to defeat or beat back or call out fake news is merely a big power play by governments to control the information narrative, to where they decide, they and their cronies and their allies, which I believe includes Facebook, which I believe includes Twitter, which I believe includes what have you, YouTube, Google, you name it, in our country and in other countries as well, in which truth is not what we decide for ourselves. We don't decide what information is valid or is accurate or is worth looking into. But the only information that we're allowed to access is what the government says we can. The only thing that we should believe is what the government says is true. And so be very, very careful. I mean, like I said, look around. Use your discernment. And again, keep an eye on again, does it pass the spiritual test, the biblical test, the scriptural test? Or does it not? Is it written, as I've said, that things are going to get better and we're going to get a reprieve? Or is it written that we're going into captivity? And that as a nation we'll go into captivity, and that individuals, those who will be led into captivity will go into captivity. Those who would die by the sword will die by the sword, spiritually speaking. Doesn't mean necessarily they're going to hell when it's all said and done, but they'll certainly be deceived. But that gets into the educational, the political, just dividing the country by politics, dividing the country by party, making one think that they have a choice, that one has to choose between the lesser of two evils, even though you can put any president in and put one in of the next party and one in of the party before that, and things basically continue right along the same path. And then you get into the religion, and you get into the blending of kind of one world religion when it comes to the Antichrist heading it, as well as Christians starting to accept certain things that, quite frankly, are not acceptable in God's eyes, that don't stand as being clean or righteous in God's eyes. But that now, you can't say that homosexual acts are sinful. You can't say that a transgender person is in the wrong, does err biblically or spiritually. And again, as I've said, you can't even say, or you have so-called Christians who would say that abortion is a blessing from God. But the big thing is every single one of these work together. And at this time in particular, you don't want to get too caught up into any of them. It's good to know, it's very good to stay aware of current events and to pass along information, to try to discern what is going on and share it with others, to warn others where applicable. But you don't want to get too caught up in it, because altogether each dynasty, each sector, if you will, is part of Babylon, spiritually speaking. And if you allow yourself to get too caught up, and I'll say it, politics, Christians are to be watchmen at this time in particular. And again, it's well and good to pay attention to all things political. It's well and good to call out bad policy, bad ideas, harmful things, spiritually corrupt things. But if you spend too much time, it doesn't take much to get off that wall and stop looking at things prophetically. And pretty soon you're down here, instead of being up in the watchtower or on the wall watching, pretty soon you're down here on the ground, mixing with everybody else, mixing with the ways of the world, and talking about, how Trump sure put one over on them this time. Trump sure has them going. Trump has them eating right out of his hand. Pelosi's an idiot. Ocasio-Cortez is a dingbat. And dingbat she may be, or wrong-headed she may be. And again, it's fine to talk about it, but don't get too caught up into it. Because if you get too caught up into it, then you're caught up right into Babylon. And you can either be caught up in Babylon, or you can come out of Babylon. And none of us are perfect. But at this time in particular, God is looking for champions. God is looking for people who are going to stand for Him and not get too distracted by this or by that. And we all have weaknesses, and certainly I have weaknesses. And it is also easy in the flesh to get caught up in wishful thinking and concerns of the flesh. But there's a time for that, and there's a time to put that behind you as best you can, and march forward as a watchman, as a champion for God, so you can be used by Him. Digression, perhaps, or I've spent a good bit of time on this. I don't know, more time or less time than I wanted. Like I said, I do have a subject that I want to get into, and still have over 20 minutes, almost 25 minutes. I want to talk along with this notion of nationalist and populist uprisings. What you have going on in France right now, what you've had going on in France, is this Yellow Vest movement. And with this Yellow Vest movement, it allegedly was started in response to them raising the gasoline tax. And it's very interesting, as I was talking to somebody earlier today on my personal Facebook timeline, that even in this country, it would seem like now they're trying to raise gasoline tax in various states. Here in Ohio, they're talking about the governor, DeWine, a Republican for what it's worth, is talking about 18 cents per gallon tax hike, gasoline tax hike. And they're trying to counter, say, maybe 10.5 cents per gallon, the state Congress, state House, and Senate is. A friend told me that they raised it a whole 50 cents per gallon, or that's what they were looking to do in Michigan. And this is spreading, by the way. It's spread to Canada. It's said to have spread to the United States. But so many people are looking at this Yellow Vest movement as this big movement against elitist, against even the Rothschilds, if you will, the Soroses, if you will, the international bankers, as well as the elitists and establishment politicians. More of what we're hearing, again, both in this country and in various places around the world. And I shared a story over the weekend, and I looked at what these Yellow Vests were doing in France, setting fires, acts of violence, and not to say they haven't been roughed up in some cases as well, setting fire to buildings, and just common sense. And I asked, how is this any different than what's happened in this country with some of these movements? Like Black Lives Matter, or some of these mobs going to Baltimore and destroying that city, going to Ferguson, Missouri, and destroying that city. It isn't any different. And so, should we really look at this as a liberty movement? And it's interesting to note, and I don't know if I'll share it on American Faith Today on the Facebook page or not, but I did share on my own timeline, and I'll read a little bit too. I'm not going to play any part of the YouTube video. It was about 12 minutes long. But, you have this magazine, among other things. It's called The Economist. And it's been a magazine that the Rothschilds have held a share in. They consider themselves the custodians of this magazine's, this publication's legacy. And along about 2015, you had, I believe it's the Angeli family out of Italy and the Rothschilds, who basically bought out the group that held 50% of the ownership of The Economist, to where now it's pretty much distributed evenly between the Rothschilds and the Angelis. And this is a magazine, like I said, Rothschild influenced, if not run and controlled. And it was pointed out that in 2017, not only do you have these tarot cards on the cover of a particular issue of this magazine, and you have Trump sitting on top of planet Earth on a tarot card called Judgment, which is troubling in and of itself. But you also have this little group of yellow-clad individuals marching, as it were, on a tarot card called Hermit, which people are trying to determine. People who know a little bit more about tarot cards are trying to determine just how it fits into the Hermit tarot card. But these yellow-clad people that are marching, and in the picture on the Hermit tarot card, they seem to be marching against things like TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the EU. And then when you look into some of the things that most people aren't talking about, like this, for instance, this from henrymakow.com. And I saw also something along these lines of fellowshipoftheminds.com. But it says there are red flags indicating that the Yellow Vest protest are under the control of Soros and the bankster elites. The domain, Gilets Jaunes, or however it's pronounced, .com, it's French for Yellow Vest. Now, this is a movement that got started last year. But this domain, GiletsJaunes.com, was registered 1 year before the Yellow Vest movement started. On May 15th, 2017, it was registered in the United States just after the election of Macron and the day after its installation. And this from December of last year. The last update was December of last year. All the information about that name domain are secured with dropcatch.com, and the transfer of the name domain is blocked, and the addresses of the depositor and of the technical administrative contacts are at the same address, 2635 Walnut Street, Denver, Colorado. And I could say, without getting too conspiracy theory, that if you know anything about kind of a weird airport that some would say is kind of occultish or Illuminati or even satanic and what have you, in Denver, Colorado, even that might, like I said, without going completely down a conspiracy rabbit hole, but might raise some bells for some. But again, the domain registered over a year before this got started in Denver, Colorado. They've tried to hide it, gone to pretty good lengths to hide it. It's restricted to most normal people. You have to have some type of special access. And on this particular page or article, you have the Hermit card from the 2017 Economist cover. Yellow vests say no to EU and TTIP fuel tax. And again, this in 2017, before this movement started. You have in the lower right-hand corner above the word the Hermit, words the Hermit, kind of a cracked, fractured globe, planet Earth. And it says, pay attention on the cover predictions of The Economist 2017. On the Hermit card above, we can clearly see a political demonstration with a crowd of small yellow-dressed men and women. Their demand, stop and no flags are clearly against Europe, the EU flag, and the TTIP transatlantic treaty, and the tip taxes of the oil products. The movement started immediately